Most people think wealth is a money problem. I do not. I think for most people it is a structure problem. They keep trying to solve it with more income, more hustle, more information, more excitement, more optimization, more trying, more chasing. And meanwhile, the structure underneath their life keeps doing the same thing it has always done. It leaks through lifestyle, it leaks through status, it leaks through impulse, it leaks through complexity, it leaks through comparison, it leaks through the quiet belief that one day, somehow, money itself will save them from the habits that keep draining it. That never happens. Money does not save a weak structure, it amplifies it. That is the first thing I want you to hear. The second thing is harder. A lot of people do make good money. They are not starving. They are not reckless in any theatrical way. They have jobs, salaries, subscriptions, decent cars, okay apartments, some small savings, maybe even a retirement account they barely understand. From the outside, they look like they are doing fine. From the inside, they are still trapped. They are still one raise away from a nicer cage, one bonus away from a better costume, one bad quarter away from realizing the whole thing was still built on labor stress and the hope that next year would somehow feel less tight. That is not wealth, that is organized dependence. And organized dependence is one of the most expensive lifestyles in the world because it looks stable right until the day you notice you have been moving for years and still have not built enough to disappear from the game. That is where I want to begin. Because if you want the mother line for everything I am about to tell you, here it is. Quiet wealth is not built by chasing money harder than everyone else. It is built by reducing the number of things money has to carry, automating ownership before appetite gets a vote, and separating your life from the social and emotional habits that keep turning income into noise instead of freedom. That is the line. Read it again. Because once you understand that, you stop asking the wrong question. You stop asking, how do I look richer? You stop asking, how do I make more this month? You stop asking, what should I buy next now that I finally earned it? You start asking a much colder and much more profitable question. What kind of life would let my money stay with me long enough to start working harder than I do? That is the adult question. That is the useful question. That is the question most people never ask because the modern world is built to keep them focused on lifestyle before freedom. But freedom is the whole point. Not things, not admiration, not updates, not proof. Freedom, I want to say that more clearly. Money is not for impressing people. It is not for proving that your life moved up one rung in somebody else's ranking system. It is not for becoming the kind of person strangers envy online. Money is for optionality. Money is for time. Money is for being able to leave bad work, ignore stupid pressure, survive weak seasons, protect your attention, choose your mornings, and eventually reach the point where your life is paid for by claims you own instead of hours you must keep selling. That is the real goal. And if that is not the goal, then a great many people are winning the wrong game beautifully. Now let me show you the first mechanism. I call it the freedom gap. This is where real wealth begins, not with the first investment, not with the first lucky stock, not with the first moment you feel sophisticated with the gap. The gap between what comes in and what goes out, that gap is the only raw material from which ordinary people build freedom. The source material keeps returning to one deep idea. Money should be treated as freedom, not as a scoreboard or shopping fuel, and the real objective is eventually reaching financial escape velocity, where your investments carry your life instead of your labor having to do all the work. Fayfalesite, Fay turn 51, file 0 Fay, that image matters because it gets the sequence right. A rocket does not escape gravity because it looks impressive. It escapes because enough force is directed in one direction long enough to break free from the pull. Money works the same way. If every raise becomes a nicer apartment, a nicer car, more subscriptions, more dinners, more upgraded identity, then your life never reaches escape velocity. You just get heavier. That is what most people do. They earn more, then they build more weight, the bills rise, the habits rise, the expectations rise, the need to keep earning rises, and then they tell themselves they are moving up. Maybe socially they are. Financially they are often just deepening gravity. That is why I call it the freedom gap. The gap is not spare cash, the gap is thrust, the gap is your private engine. Without it, there is no freedom path, there is only nicer dependence. This is why I have always cared more about the distance between income and lifestyle than about income alone. A person making $80,000 and living on $50 is often playing a much stronger game than a person making $300,000 and spending $290. That second person looks rich. He is often strategically poor. He is rich in visible output and poor in retained force. That is a bad trade. And the modern world encourages that bad trade every day You work harder, you earn more, you deserve more, fine. But each deserved upgrade steals from escape velocity if you let it. That is why the wealthy who become truly free are often not the loudest spenders. They understand that freedom is purchased by keeping the gap wide enough that assets begin growing faster than appetite. That is the freedom gap. And once you understand it, every raise, bonus, side income, and windfall looks different. It does not ask, what can I upgrade? It asks, how much of this can I freeze before my lifestyle gets its hands on it? That is a much richer question. Now let me take you into the second mechanism. I call it the tool rule. This is where many people lose the plot completely, because they start worshiping the thing that was only supposed to help them build. The source document says this very directly: money is a tool, not a life purpose. And once money itself becomes the goal, people start making decisions that do not improve life, only enlarge the number while shrinking peace, health, and freedom. Fay file a site, Fay turn 51 file 0 Fay. That is exactly right. You do not worship a hammer, you decide what you want to build with it. Money should be treated the same way. But modern life keeps tempting people into the opposite arrangement. They stop asking, what kind of life do I want this money to create? They start asking, how do I get more money? That sounds practical. It is often a trap because a person chasing money without a life design becomes incredibly easy to exploit. He will stay in bad work longer. He will rationalize stress more elegantly. He will trade time for status. He will sacrifice relationships for throughput. He will call himself disciplined while becoming hollow. And then one day he will have a larger number, more fatigue, and still no coherent answer to the question he should have asked earlier. What was all of this for? That is why the tool rule matters so much. If money is the tool, you must define the build. Freedom, time, peace, mobility. The ability to say no, the ability to work because you choose to, not because the machine threatens you if you slow down, the ability to leave a business that has become your prison, the ability to live with dignity without proving anything to anybody. That is the build. And once you define it, a lot of false goals lose their glamour. A bigger title is not automatically progress. A busier calendar is not automatically progress. A more expensive life is not automatically progress. Those things may or may not serve the build. That is what matters. The tool rule cuts through a great deal of modern confusion because it stops you from using money to pursue feelings. Money cannot actually solve. If you are anxious, more money alone does not make you peaceful. It often makes you a richer, anxious person. If you are empty, money does not fill the emptiness. It amplifies the shape of the emptiness. If you have no design for your life, money does not provide one. It gives you more elaborate ways to avoid the question. That is why I say money solves money problems. It does not solve purpose problems. And if you do not know that, you become very easy to mislead. The world keeps selling people the idea that the next income level is the emotional fix. Usually it is just the next test of whether they know what the tool is for. Now let me take you into the third mechanism. I call it the automatic river. This may be the most practical mechanism of the entire system because it removes heroics and replaces them with structure. The source material is very clear here. Investing should be automated before you ever see the money because discipline fades, moods change, wants appear, and next month has a way of never arriving. It argues that out of sight really does help keep money from getting consumed. Fay file a site, Fay turn 51 file 0 Fay. That is exactly how serious people think. You do not rely on inspiration to do what must be done repeatedly for years. You build a river. Income comes in. A portion of that income gets redirected automatically into ownership. Not after thought, not after temptation, not after the week has had a chance to convince you that you deserve a reward before. That is why I call it the automatic river. A good river does not ask your permission every month. It keeps flowing. A person who relies on willpower to invest is still negotiating with appetite every payday. That is too weak, too human, too emotional. And emotion is expensive. Automation is not laziness. Automation is pre-commitment. It is how you stop forcing your future to depend on the moral strength of your most tired self. If the money is already gone before your spending brain meets it, the game changes. Now lifestyle must adapt around the investment, instead of the investment waiting to see what lifestyle leaves behind. That is a huge reversal. And most fortunes built quietly depend on some version of it. The reason so many people never build anything meaningful is not that they never heard about investing. It is that every contribution remained optional. Optional means emotional. Emotional means fragile. Fragile means inconsistent. and inconsistency is poison in the early years, because the early years are when contributions matter most and visible results matter least. That is exactly when people need automation most. Now let me say something harsher. A lot of adults still build their entire financial life as if they will become a different species of disciplined person later. They 1T. The adult version of discipline is not feeling more noble. It is needing less nobility, because the structure already does the right thing before weakness gets a vote. That is the automatic river. And once you build it, the whole emotional meaning of payday changes. Payday stops being a shopping event. It becomes a transfer event, a movement of current effort into future freedom. That is what you want. Now let me take you into the fourth mechanism. I call it the raise trap. This is where many high earners lose the game without realizing it. The source material is very sharp on this point. It says to live below your means, especially when you earn more. And it gives the right law. Wealth is built in the gap between what you earn and what you spend. It even gives the example of a client who generated millions and still went bankrupt because lifestyle expansion absorbed everything. Fay turn 51 file 0 Fay. That is the raise trap. A person finally gets more income. He feels relief, then he feels entitlement, then he feels pressure to match the new income with a new visible self. Better place, better car, more memberships, more dining, more convenience, more symbolic proof that the raise happened. Soon the raise is gone and the life is more expensive. That is not progress. That is absorption. The market gave you more force. You gave it back to lifestyle before it could become capital. The public calls this normal. I call it one of the most efficient destruction mechanisms in middle-class life. Because once you normalize raise absorption, every future increase begins with an invisible claim already attached to it. The new life wants its share, and it always asks loudly. This is why serious builders do something different. When income rises, they freeze the majority of the increase before the nervous system gets used to it. They keep living on the old salary long enough that the delta becomes ownership. That is how people quietly become rich while their friends keep wondering why there is never anything left over, no matter how much more they make. It is not a mystery. It is sequence. Capture first, adapt later, maybe much later. The richer you become, the more you should distrust the urge to let lifestyle move at the same speed. That urge is one of the cleanest reasons wealthy looking people remain strategically weak for life. They are earning well and retaining badly. That is a terrible combination. Now let me take you into the fifth mechanism. I call it the comparison furnace. This is where social media, status anxiety, and ordinary insecurity combine to burn surplus faster than almost anything else. The source material says it plainly. Comparison with online flexing makes people feel behind, even when they are actually building real wealth, because they are comparing their reality to other people's highlight reels. It makes the important distinction that most people are showing spending, not net worth. Fay turn 51 file 0 Fay, that is the comparison furnace. It burns contentment. It burns patience. It burns the emotional calm needed to stay in your lane. And once those things burn, money usually follows. The internet is full of visible signals. Cars, trips, watches, apartments, restaurants, success. But most of what you are looking at is not evidence of freedom. It is evidence of expenditure. That is not the same thing. A person can appear rich and still be financing appearances with fragility. A person can look modest and still be stacking options quietly. The source text is right to say that this confusion pulls people back into the game precisely when they were trying to escape it. Fay turn 51 file 0 Fay, because comparison changes the emotional meaning of your own restraint. The investment contribution you were proud of yesterday suddenly feels like missing out. The used car you appreciated suddenly feels like failure. The quiet life you were building starts looking small because someone else rented a louder one for the camera. That is the furnace. It melts discipline into impulse. The only answer is not to become morally perfect. It is to become strategically indifferent. Know where you are going. Know what the money is for. Know that visible spending and invisible strength are usually pulling in opposite directions. Once you really understand that, the flex loses some of its magic. Not all of it. You are still human. Still enough of it. That is what matters. Now let me say something deeper. Comparison does not only make people spend more, it makes them speed up unnecessarily. And speed is expensive. A person trying to match other people's timeline will usually overpay for almost everything. Overpay in housing, overpay in car choice, overpay in lifestyle, overpay in impatience. That is why staying in your lane is not just emotional advice, it is financial engineering. Your lane is where compounding can happen without the heat of other people. as theater forcing you into decisions that belong to their script, not yours. That is the comparison furnace. And the cooler your mind stays around it, the richer your future gets. Now let me take you into the sixth mechanism. I call it the visibility rule. This is where most people discover that they do not actually have a money problem first. They have an uninspected life problem. The source material says the right thing here too. Most people have no real idea where every dollar is going until they look honestly. And once they truly see the flows, change becomes possible. It even gives the story of a missing $400 per month turning out to be ordinary target spending that had become invisible through repetition. Fay file site Fay turn 51 file 0 Fay. That is the visibility rule. What you do not measure quietly grows teeth. A person can say, I don't know where my money goes, as if that were a cute little mystery. It is not cute. It is structural blindness. And structural blindness is how years disappear. Because if you cannot see the leak, you cannot plug it. If you cannot see the subscriptions, the food drift, the convenience costs, the little emotional rewards, then you will spend your life blaming the wrong force. You will blame income, you will blame timing, you will blame bad luck, and all the while the truth will be much simpler. You were bleeding in 10 small places every week and calling the total surprising. This is why tracking matters so much. Not because spreadsheets are beautiful, because visibility changes behavior. Once you know exactly where money is going, a great deal of nonsense loses its innocence. Now the extra spending is not abstract. Now it has a name, a pattern, a frequency, a cost. That is when real power begins. And the same is true one level higher with net worth. The source material says net worth should be tracked consistently, not obsessively perhaps, but consciously. Because what you track you improve, and because guessing does not build wealth. It describes the emotional shift from anxiety when checking accounts to actual satisfaction as balances were watched grow over time. Fay file site Fay turn 51 file 0 Fay. That is one of the deepest psychological shifts in the whole game. At first looking hurts, fine. Look anyway. If the truth makes you anxious, that is not evidence against the truth. It is evidence you need the truth more than comfort. Then, if you keep looking and keep acting, something changes. The numbers begin to move. Not dramatically at first. Still enough to alter identity. Now, you are not merely hoping to become stronger. You are watching strength get built. That is a very different life. No financial fog, no pretending not to know what comes in, what goes out, what is owned, what is owed, what is growing, what is decaying. That is adult wealth building. Everything else is theater. Now let me take you into the seventh mechanism. I call it the identity release. This may be the deepest mechanism in the whole file because it goes below behavior and into self-worth. The source material says something very important. Many people tie identity, confidence, and emotional worth to money, income, and business success. It argues that the moment money becomes a scoreboard for your value, it begins controlling your decisions, emotions, and need to prove yourself. It returns again to the idea that money is a tool, not an identity. Fay file site Fay turn 51 file 0 Fay. That is exactly right. A person whose self-worth depends on money is almost impossible to stabilize financially, because now every financial move carries an emotional charge beyond the move itself. If income rises, he feels like more. If income falls, he feels like less. If others seem to be winning, he feels threatened. If he buys status goods, he feels defended. This is a miserable arrangement, not because money does not matter, because money now sits in the wrong psychological seat. It is supposed to serve you. It is not supposed to define you. Once it defines you, the whole structure weakens. Now every decision is contaminated by performance. Should I buy this? Not because I need it, because I want to feel like the version of myself who can. Should I keep this business? Not because it fits the life I want, because without it, who am I? Should I make this investment? Not because the math is right, because I need a win. That is identity making money stupid. The source material is right to insist that when self-worth is detached from money, strategy improves. Fay file site Fay turn 51 file 0 Fay. Of course it does, because calm becomes possible. A tool is easier to use well once it stops being a mirror. This is why real freedom requires more than good accounts. It requires psychological separation. Who you are cannot be equal to what you earn. The moment you achieve that separation, two wonderful things happen. You stop needing to impress, and you stop panicking when the numbers fluctuate. Both of those changes are financially massive. The first protects spending, the second protects compounding, that is the identity release. It is not soft, it is one of the highest return internal changes a person can make. Now, let me take you into the eighth mechanism. I call it the decade lens. This is where almost everyone who stays poor gets exposed, because the modern world has trained them to think in days, weeks, quarters, maybe at best a year. The source material ends on exactly the right note. Think in decades, not days. It uses the seed and tree metaphor, and it says directly that real wealth is built slowly, quietly, consistently over long periods rather than through violent short-term moves. Fay Philocite, Fay Turn 51 File 0 Fay, that is the decade lens. And without it, none of the other habits survive. A person thinking in days wants relief. A person thinking in decades wants structure. A person thinking in days sees a working Toyota and wants the BMW. A person thinking in decades sees retirement years, option value, time reclaimed, and the absurd trade of sacrificing the second for the first. A person thinking in days wants to feel richer. Now a person thinking in decades wants to become freer later. Those are different minds. The market pays them very differently. This is why I always tell people that patience is not passive. It is disciplined time preference. It is the willingness to place today. S ego behind tomorrow. S leverage. That is hard, which is exactly why it works. A seed does not become a tree because you check it every morning. It becomes a tree because you stop disturbing it long enough for the invisible work to continue. Money is much the same. You plant, you water, you protect. You do not dig it up every week because your emotions want evidence. The source material is right unless you are making huge sums and spending almost none of them. Real wealth will usually take decades. Fay Philocite, Fay Turn 51 File 0 Fay, that should not depress you. That should focus you. Decades pass anyway. The question is whether they pass in service of a structure or in service of appetite. That is the real choice. The decade lens is not glamorous. It is also what separates the quietly free from the permanently busy. Now, let me step back and show you the whole machine. Freedom matters more than things. Money must remain a tool, not a shrine. Investing has to be automated before appetite intervenes. Raises must be captured before lifestyle absorbs them. Comparison has to lose its emotional authority. Spending and net worth must become visible. Self-worth must be cut loose from money. And the entire process must be viewed through decades, not moods. That is not a list. That is an operating system for quiet wealth. And once you see it as a system, a lot of the drama disappears. You do not need luck. You need sequence. You do not need stress. You need structure. You do not need to feel rich. You need to become less expensive to yourself. Now let me make the identity flip explicit. Most people think wealth means making more money. That is too small. The real win is needing money less because your life, your spending, your identity, and your systems have all been built in a way that allows capital to accumulate quietly in the background until it begins covering the life you already learned to enjoy. That is the flip. A person earning more but needing more is still trapped. A person earning enough and needing less while owning more is already moving toward escape velocity. That is a different life. And once you understand that, you stop admiring the wrong people. You stop envying the loud spender. You start respecting the quiet builder, the one with the ordinary car, the simple systems, the automated investing, the low drama, the invisible net worth, the unposted peace. That is where real wealth lives. Now let me bring the operating system together in plain language. First, define money as freedom before the world defines it as consumption. Second, automate investing before the paycheck can become a shopping event. Third, keep lifestyle growth slower than income growth for much longer than feels socially normal. Fourth, refuse comparison with people showing spending rather than net worth. Fifth, track every major flow so that leaks become visible. Sixth, detach identity from money so the tool can finally be used rationally. Seventh, think in decades and let repetition become your leverage. That is the operating system, not hustle theater, not status, quiet power. Now let me put the blade into this as cleanly as I can. The habits that build quiet wealth are not exciting because excitement is usually what the poor version of you keeps buying instead of freedom. The real path is slower, simpler, quieter, and far more effective. Build the gap, automate the river, capture the raise, ignore the flex, see the numbers, release the ego. Think in decades. Do that long enough. And one day you will realize something extraordinary happened without ever needing luck or noise. Your money stopped asking for your labor every morning. And that is when the game really changes.